Movie opens with a man whose name is Mort Rainey. He is very anxious, sitting in a car, and very confused whether he should go or not. Mort could not hold himself and gets out of the car. He steals the key of a motel room and enters that room. He sees his wife with somebody else in the room. Now he is very depressed and he screams. In next scene we see that 6 months have passed. There is a beautiful remote lake house where Mort lives alone with his dog Chico. Mort was sleeping. Suddenly someone knocks the door. Mort feels disturbed and unwillingly opens the door. There he sees a hat-wearing man. The man says, "You have stolen my story. Why you have stolen it?" Mort says, "Do I know you?" But the man says, "It does not matter. I know you and you have stolen my story." The man shows the manuscript. Mort says, "You have mistaken. I don't need your manuscript. And if you need any grievance, then you can contact my literary agent." But the man says, "This is between you and me, and we don't need any outsider. This has got to be settled." Mort says it is settled and closed the door. Then he saw a man is going, but he has not his manuscript in his hand. Mort went outside, where he finds the manuscript is lying on the floor. He picks it up and it says, "Sowing Season" by John Shooter. Mort says, "I never heard of this story," and throws into the trash. And again he goes to sleep. Next morning he is working on his project, but it seems he is so confused. He goes to the fridge to get something to drink and finds the manuscript on the table, which was placed by his maid. She finds it on the trash, thinking that it would be important. Then Mort reads it and becomes worried because the story matches exactly with Mort's story, Secret Window. Then he thinks that the man must have stolen my story, and he goes back to sleep. But he is still confused and tries to sleep but cannot sleep. As soon as he falls asleep, he suddenly gets a call. It was her wife Amy's call. Mort and her wife do not live together. During their conversation, Mort asks, does she think his story Secret Window is inspired by any other story or event? But suddenly Mort says forget it, and he asks about Ted, with whom Amy is engaged. But the conversation ends. Next day, Mort meets John Shooter, the man who claimed the story was stolen. Shooter asked Mort, did he read it? Mort asked him, when you wrote it? Shooter says, I wrote it in 1997. Then Mort says, drop it, because I wrote it in late 94, and it was published in June 1995 in a magazine. Then Shooter grabbed him and pushed toward his car, saying, do not lie to me. What is the proof of your saying? Then Mort says, I don't need to prove it to you. If you want proof, then go find yourself. Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, June 1995. But Shooter says you have to prove it by yourself, and I am giving you 3 days to prove it. Else it will not be good for you. Mort is very troubled because the magazine is in his house where Amy is living, where he didn't want to go. That night he suddenly woke up hearing a noise. He finds a note outside which says, you have 3 days. I'm not joking. No police. He suddenly gets shocked by looking to Chico's dead body. He shouts the man name very angrily, Shooter! I'll get you for this. Then he buries Chico. Next day Mort went to police station and tells everything about his dog murder, the note he got, and the man, John Shooter. Then he visits to a private investigator, Ken, and asks him to investigate. Ken assures Mort not to worry. He will look around. From there he leaves for his house where Amy lives to get the magazine. There he sees Amy and Ted, and he feels very bad. That's why he comes back from there without taking the magazine. Mort reaches his lake house where Ken is waiting for him. Ken says he didn't find anything and he leaves. Then Shooter arrives and says, you went to Amy's house, didn't you? Did you brought magazine to prove? Mort asks him if he will show him the magazine. Will he be gone forever? But Shooter says there is no such magazine and you have stolen my book. Admit it. Mort asks, what do you want? Shooter says, you just ruined my story ending. I want you to rewrite the ending, which ends like, in time, murder has been a mystery even to me, and publish it by my name. Otherwise, Amy will pay the price for it. Hearing about Amy, Mort becomes angry and tries to attack Shooter with a rod. But Shooter grabbed him and threatens Mort to do as he said. Next morning, Mort gets a call from Amy. Amy told that someone burned down their house. Mort visits to his house where he sees Ted as well. Mort is very upset. Officer asks Mort and Amy, did they have doubt on anyone or did they got any enemies? Then Mort says he has one. Mort tells about John Shooter and did every legal work of his burned house. He also had discussion with Ted later. Mort returns to his lake house. He gets phone call from his private investigator, Ken. Ken asked him about the day. Mort tells that someone burnt his house and that magazine also got burnt. And he also says that he thinks Shooter is behind all this. Ken says it is also possible that someone has hired him. Mort says it can be Ted. Ken asks Mort to meet him in morning at the store. Next morning, Mort woke up and he finds the car keys are missing. When he opened the door, he finds Shooter's hat on the floor. His car was unlocked and the key was plugged to the car. He takes the hat with him to the store and where Ken told him to meet. But Ken was not there, so Mort leaves the store. While coming back, he sees Ted near the gas station. Mort asks him that why he is here, and he also says, I know what you are up to. So just tell me what you want. Ted gives him divorce papers to sign and says, just sign it. Mort says, so this was all about, so you did these things. You just want my wife, my house, my money. Just remember, you started this shit and I'm gonna finish it. And go back to your friend and tell him what I just said. Mort comes back to his lake house. He receives a phone call from John Shooter. Shooter tells him to come and meet him where they first met, and if he will inform anyone that will be his responsibility. Mort runs to him. There he finds dead bodies of Ken and the police officer whom he complained. John Shooter says it is all your fault. I told you it was all between you and me. I told you, no police, you are responsible for all this. Mort screams what you want from me. Shooter says, as I told you, I want you to fix my story ending, which you have stolen. Mort again says that he didn't steal any story. He requested a copy of that magazine which will arrive at 3 p.m. and he will prove that the story is published in June 1995, which has his name, Mort Rainey, on it. Shooter says then you have 2 hours to prove it. If you didn't prove or shows up until 4, then I will burn your life and every person in it like a cane field. And if you proves, then I will confess all my sins. Mort come back to his house. He receives a phone call from Amy. She is asking him to sign the divorce paper, but Mort denies. So Amy decides to go to him alone and request him to sign the papers. On the other hand, Mort visits post office to collect his copy of magazine which he requested. He finds that the parcel is broken and his content pages are torn as it has been cut off. Now he is fed up and went to his lake house. Mort wears Shooter's hat and looks in the mirror. Mort is looking very dangerous. He is talking to himself. Suddenly other Morts appears. They are his imagination. One Mort says, why you're doing this? Other Mort says, you are a murderer. You should surrender. There is no John Shooter. It's just you. You created him. It's all in your mind. You burned your house. You killed your dog. You killed Ken and Tom. You are living in your story, and you want to change its ending. Mort Rainey is suffering from dissociative identity disorder. He has multiple identity in him. Now his imagination, John Shooter, appears and tells him we have much more to do. We have to fix the story. We have to fix the ending. Then we see Amy arrives. She sees the pages of magazine are scattered outside. Then she enters in the house. She finds everything in the house is scattered. There are cigarettes and alcohol on the table. Amy finds the word shooter is written all over the place. Then she saw Mort wearing hat behind the door, and she realized the word shooter means shoot her. She gets very scared and runs away. She tries to escape, but Mort grabs her and pulled her in and stabs her. But she tries to escape, but Mort kicks her to the ground and says this has to be done. Then we see Ted arrives. Ted is searching for Amy. Mort has a shovel in his hand. Mort attacks Ted with the shovel and kills him. Mort says to Amy, her death will be a mystery, even for me. And he kills Amy. In next scene, we see Mort visits to a store where everybody is uncomfortable by seeing him. A policeman arrives to Mort's house and says, everyone knows what you did. I will find their bodies, and your life will end up in prison. Mort says, do you know, officer, the most important part of a story is ending, and this one is perfect. Mort keeps the bodies buried under the window. Movie ends with saying, I am sure that in time, every bit of her will be gone, and her death will be a mystery, even for me.